Welcome to Timeless Healing Insights. I'm Dr. David DeRose. Today we continue a series digging deeply into healing insights from the Gospel of Mark. And as we prepare for our study today, I'm reminded of how some years ago I ended up myself, as a physician, hospitalized. Many of my peers told me, oh, well, now you'll understand better what patients go through. Well, is that good news or not? Do you want a wounded physician or a physician who's whole? We'll engage with that topic in today's study because the Bible tells us that Jesus was wounded for our transgressions. He was chastised because of our sins. Mark focuses on Jesus. I invite you to do the same now as we study together. Father in heaven, we thank you that you are our faithful guide. You are always willing to open your word to us. That's why you gave us the scriptures. And so now we ask for Jesus to guide our minds as we open the scriptures. We ask it all in his name. Amen. Perhaps you've been there before, on some kind of journey, or maybe even dropped off somewhere, and you are totally lost. Can some of you relate to that? Just being totally lost, having no idea where you are. Well, if someone dropped you off on the northeastern coast of the United States and you saw this lighthouse, you would know, hopefully, that you were in Portland, Maine, because this is the landmark of the Portland headlight. Landmarks can be vital when it comes to getting and keeping our bearings. We've been looking at Mark's gospel, and as we've been going through the first 8 chapters of his gospel, we've been seeing a number of landmarks. Today we see another one, or at least I point out a couple of them to you. Because when we came to Mark 8, verse 22 in our last study together, I would suggest to you we have reached a critical landmark, whether you realized it or not. You see, as we've been walking through Mark's gospel, we've been seeing Jesus' ministry with power. He's been healing people. He's been teaching. He's been doing miracle after miracle. And you might think we've been going through the gospel fairly slowly. We've only gone through about half his gospel. But interestingly enough, even though we're right at about the center of Mark's gospel, we have largely gone through chronologically almost all of Jesus' ministry. There's not much left as far as the amount of time in Jesus' ministry. By the time you get to chapter 11 of Mark's gospel, which isn't all that much further ahead in time, that is the triumphal entry. That is the Sunday before Jesus is crucified. So we are far into Jesus' ministry when we get to Mark 8, verse 22. But that critical passage is a turning point in his gospel. You see, we're coming right now to the very central portion of Mark's gospel from chapter 8, verse 22 through chapter 10, verse 52. And there is a series of teachings that Jesus gives especially to the disciples. If you've been following along, the account that we looked at last time we were together, we saw a miraculous story of how Jesus gave sight to a blind man. But we saw the story was not just about restored eyes, it was about a restored brain. Not just restored eyes, but also restored hearts. Let's look at the story again to refresh your memory, or for those of you that didn't catch the earlier message. Mark chapter 8, verse 22. It says, "Then he, Jesus, came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. So he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes and put his hands on him, he asked him if he saw anything. And he looked up and said, 'I see men like trees walking.' Then he put his hands on his eyes again, Jesus did, and he made him look up, and he was restored and saw everyone clearly." As we looked at this story, we realized that it seemed like the man and his friends perhaps had just requested of Jesus that his eyes be healed. And Jesus does that first. As we looked at what plays out here from a physician's standpoint, at least from this physician's standpoint, it seems that Jesus did indeed heal that man's eyes. But we learned that if you've been without vision for many years, it's not enough just to heal the eyes. You have to heal the brain. And so that's what Jesus does next in this two-phase healing. You see, your eyes encode sensory input, and it's amazing. I mean, you don't have to be a physician to appreciate this, but think about this. I'm actually looking out and I see you folks, and you folks see me. And folks tuning in, whether it's a live stream or a televised presentation, they're seeing, how does that work? Your eyes take in visual impulses and it's converted into chemistry and electricity. And it's sent to the back of your brain, the occipital cortex, where your brain interprets it. This is truly amazing. I would tell you, if you're honest and haven't grown up like I did with bias, you would have to say, I can't imagine any way that could just have evolved over eons and eons. It looks like it is designed by a loving creator. But it's not just enough to have the eyes, you've got to have the brain to recognize what you're perceiving. So we are here in Mark chapter 8. And we're coming to this change in focus. The first part of Mark's gospel, that's right, Jesus coming with power. From the very beginning in Mark chapter 1, the kingdom of God is at hand. But now the focus turns from Jesus and his public ministry, it turns to the disciples and Jesus' coming sacrifice. We'll see that just like that healing of the blind man, the disciples have correct perception. They realize that Jesus is the Messiah, but they don't recognize what the Messiah's mission is all about. Let's see how it plays out. And it's not just me who's telling you this today. I mean, anyone who looks at the structure of Mark's gospel pretty much comes to the same conclusion. I've got many commentaries on the Gospel of Mark that I've been looking at. Here's just one. These two miracles. Mark 8, verse 22 begins with the healing of a blind man. Mark 10, chapter 10, will end with the healing of another blind man. These two miracles are like bookends, focusing on what? Discernment or recognition as being central to discipleship. It's not just enough to know who Jesus is, but know what his ministry is all about. So, what did Jesus want the 12 to discern? What did he want them to recognize? What we've been seeing so far is he clearly wanted them to recognize that the gospel was for everyone. It was to go to all nations, not just to the Jews. Remember that, how we saw that in chapter 7 and onward? Especially focusing on the Gentiles. But then Jesus is going now to the disciples. He wants them to see that, yes, they've been honored to be called disciples, but discipleship is not a call to personal elevation. It's a call to what? To bearing a cross. That's what we're going to see as we move forward. Okay? So if you want to just kind of make sure you're in with the full stream of where we're at in Mark's narrative, in Mark 7, beginning with verse 24, remember, Jesus goes from the Jewish regions, he goes all the way up to Tyre and Sidon, where he heals the daughter of that Syrophoenician woman. Then he goes all the way back down to the Decapolis on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee, again ministering to Gentiles. And then in that very place, just like he fed 5,000 men who were Jewish and women and children. He does the same now in a Gentile population in the Decapolis. If you were to follow along on a map, this is what it looks like. The red lines indicate Jesus traveling through Gentile territories, first to Tyre and then to Sidon, and then coming in a very circuitous route all the way down to the Decapolis. If you see, though, the smaller blue lines, that's what's illustrated in this slide. Jesus goes from the Decapolis one more time to minister in an exclusively, largely Jewish region on the western side of the Sea of Galilee. In Mark chapter 8, verses 11 and 12, Jesus lands in Magdala. That's where Mary Magdalene was from, or at least one of the places she lived. And Jesus lands there by boat, and instead of the religious leaders greeting him saying, you know what, we've been thinking about it, you obviously are the Messiah, we've connected all the dots, we see the miracles you're doing. No, they did nothing of the sort. What did they do? That's right. They came and they said, Jesus, give us a sign. Show us a sign. And the account says they were testing him. Jesus just leaves. He basically says, you've had all the evidence you need. And he goes to a transition town of Bethsaida. You see it indicated there on the map as well. So up on the northeastern shore of the Sea of Galilee is Bethsaida. And Bethsaida is kind of at a confluence. I mean, to the east of Bethsaida is a more Gentile region. To the north is the area where Philip, one of the sons of Herod the Great, is reigning. Of course, the Herod that we know most about is reigning in Galilee and in south into Judah. And so basically we have this transition town of Bethsaida. And there, Jesus is close to where he's ministered to Jews and feeding the 5,000, but we saw that miracle he performed, that healing of that blind man, was largely done on behalf of a Gentile. The language, the way Jesus does the miracle. So we're getting this, Jesus is showing the disciples that their ministry is broad. It goes to everyone, not just to the Jews. And then he comes back. It's like he's giving the Jewish leaders one more chance, and then he's transitioning again to the Gentiles and to the purpose of his ministry. He goes from Bethsaida pretty much straight north to a place called Caesarea Philippi. And that's the other blue line, if you can make it out on the map, going pretty much straight north from the Sea of Galilee. Jesus is heading up to a region that is where the headwaters are, the source of the Jordan River. Now, I've not been to Caesarea Philippi, but I have been to an area about 5 miles from there, and to me it was the most remarkable area in all of Israel. Israel's a pretty dry place, but when you get up there, there are little springs just pouring out of the ground. There is lush verdure, greenery. It is a beautiful area. You can see why this area up there, the city of Dan is up there. You've heard of from Dan to Beersheba. This place, Caesarea Philippi, this beautiful area, source of the Jordan River, became a focus for heathen worship. No surprise, right? Not only was it a focus for heathen worship, but it also, history tells us, became a seat of emperor worship. Well, you say, that's interesting. Whether it was Baal or the Greek god Pan, it was not a Jewish stronghold. It was a heathen stronghold. Why does Jesus go there? Well, you say, he's trying to educate the disciples to the needs of the Gentiles, to the needs of the non-Jews, perhaps. But Jesus seems to have something else in mind. Many believe that Jesus brought his disciples to this particular pagan city so that they would see, that they would focus on who the real creator was. It's not Pan, it's not Baal, it is none other than Jesus himself. And so, in Matthew 8, verses 27 and onward, Jesus asked the question, who do men say that I am? It's just him with his disciples. Who do men say that I am? And as you listen to the answer, it is a sad answer. Because as they go through the list, They mention John the Baptist. They mention Elijah. They mention one of the prophets. The question is, what don't they mention? They don't mention the Messiah, okay? It seems like nobody was recognizing who Jesus was. And then Jesus asked the question, but who do you say that I am? And Peter speaks up. He says, you are the Christ. You are the anointed one. You are the Messiah. And then Jesus strictly warns them to tell no one about him. That's the whole of the account as it appears in Mark's gospel. And some of you are thinking, likely, because you've read the Bible more broadly, well, isn't there more to the story than that? I mean, it seems like there's a little bit more dialogue that Mark leaves out. What does Mark leave out? Well, let me show you what Matthew included. After Peter's declaration, Matthew has these words of Jesus. Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who's in heaven. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. And many Christians throughout the world say amen, and they say this is why we are so glad that our church is founded on Peter. Have you heard that one before? Yes. The question is Jesus saying Peter is the rock? Well, let me first remind you why we looked at these landmarks. Because this part of Mark's gospel, this part of Jesus' ministry, is not about commending the disciples. It's about pointing out the need of the disciples. Why doesn't Mark include the commendation of Peter that Matthew included? I would suggest to you what we're coming up to right now in Mark's gospel is seeing Jesus not so much as the miracle-working great physician. We saw that up through chapter 8 and into chapter 8. But now we're going to begin to see Jesus very clearly as the wounded physician. Okay? Now, let me point out some things about Peter's confession. First of all, this is spoken not only on behalf of Peter, he's speaking for all the disciples. All the disciples at this point have recognized that Jesus is the Messiah. You say, well, why do I come to that conclusion? Because we've already been through the feeding of the 5,000. You remember that took place in Mark chapter 6. That's also in John 6. And after the feeding of the 5,000, here's what played out. It says, from that time, many of his disciples, it's not speaking of the 12, it's speaking there were many people following Jesus. It says many of them did what? They turned around. When Jesus talked about eating his body and drinking his blood, many of them left. And then Jesus turns to who, according to John's gospel? He turns to the 12. And he asks the 12 collectively, do you also want to go away? And now listen to what Peter says. To whom shall what? Shall we go? Who is he speaking for? All the 12. Jesus is talking to all the 12. Peter's speaking up, and he says, you have the words of eternal life. Also, we have come to believe and know, we have come to believe and know that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. So Peter's not speaking for himself. He's speaking for all the 12. And the way we know that is nobody objects to it. Okay? Nobody says, hey, wait a minute, Peter, speak for yourself. And by the way, none of them abandoned Jesus like those other disciples did, right? So they're all still following him. They're recognizing Jesus as the Messiah. This is quite a while before we get to the point in the story of Mark 8. So this is not a unique identification that Peter has made. But there's a whole lot more to the story than that. There are multiple biblical evidences that Jesus was not telling Peter that he was any rock upon which he built the church. First of all, many commentators for years have pointed out that the Greek word for rock is different. The word used for Peter in the Greek is Petros, and this refers to a small stone, we're told, a rolling stone, in contrast to Petra, the rock of Peter's confession, or the rock Jesus himself. Now, you could say, well, I'm not a Greek scholar, so how do I know that? Because there's other people that say they're Greek scholars and take a different opinion. Well, fortunately, that's not the only line of evidence. Peter's own example says that he's not the rock. Think about it this way. Jesus said did you remember what he said in Matthew? The gates of hell or the gates of Hades shall not prevail against the church that's built on this rock. Is it the rock of Peter? Oh, no. I mean, the gates of hell prevail against Peter here in a very short time. And especially when Jesus is going to the cross. He denied Jesus with cursing and swearing. But there's more. The disciples' example and Jesus' example say, no, Peter's not the rock. Think about it this way. They're having this continual, ongoing argument about who is the greatest. Now, some of you parents perhaps can relate to this. I had some children. They were all fast learners most of the time. But sometimes you might get that question again, maybe for the third or the fourth time, and what do you say? Say, I already told you, okay? It's this way. We're not going swimming today because you didn't clean your room by 12 noon, like we said you had to do if you're going to go swimming. So don't ask a fifth time, okay? Our kids learn pretty quickly. If, once it was no, but it does take a while sometimes. So why am I telling you that illustration? It's because when the disciples are arguing about who's the greatest, couldn't Jesus just have said, how thick are you guys? I told you Peter was the rock. I'm building the church on him. He is the greatest. End of story. Why did he never say that? Because he never said it in the first place. Are you following along? And then the example of the early church, what we have biblical record of. Go to Acts 15. Who is the leader, the spokesperson of the early church? It's not Peter, it's James. Now, if that's not enough, Peter himself says no. He says, I'm not the rock. We've been seeing in Mark's gospel, the evidence indicates that who was the main informant to Mark when he wrote his gospel? Who was the main source of first-hand material? Who was it? It was Peter. That's exactly right. And so Peter, very interestingly, he realizes the gospel's not about him. The gospel's not written to elevate him. And so when Mark is telling his story, he doesn't talk about Peter walking on the water. Peter did walk on the water. But what was the miracle of the walking on the water? Whose power was being testified to? It was Jesus. So Mark's gospel only has Jesus walking on the water, not Peter. And when we get to Mark 8, there's no commendation given to Peter, because what is the emphasis? The emphasis is on the recognition that Jesus is the Messiah, not on who Peter was. So in essence, Peter, when he wrote himself about the rock, he said, you don't forget about the Greek, the Petra and the Petros. I'm going to use a different word. And when he writes about the rock, he uses a different word altogether. In 1 Peter chapter 2, he uses the word lithos. And let me show it to you. He's exalting Jesus as the only foundation rock, the only cornerstone. But it is very interesting. He says, coming to Jesus as to a living stone, rejected indeed of men, but chosen by God and precious, you also as what? Living stones are being built up to a spiritual house, a royal priesthood, to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Christ. That's really interesting because he's pointing to Jesus. He's pointing to Jesus as what? Do you see it? Yes, he's the living stone, but we too are living stones. Just like the disciples, they're being called to carry on Jesus' ministry, which goes to everyone, which elevates Christ as the Messiah, which elevates his sacrifice. We are living stones as well. But Peter doesn't stop there. He identifies Jesus as the chief cornerstone. He is the one. Peter's saying, who is the rock that the church is built on? It's Jesus. He's the chief cornerstone. This is Peter writing. The stone which the builders rejected has become the what? The chief cornerstone, a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. And that's what's playing out here in Mark's gospel, right? The Jews are being offended by Jesus. They don't recognize his messianic call, what that means, but they're still called, the disciples, to reflect Jesus. They are what? They're a royal priesthood. By the way, every one of you who has accepted Jesus as your Savior is called to be a living stone. You're being built into a temple, coming together, reflecting the glory of Christ, and built on the one rock, the only rock that the gates of hell will never prevail against. And what is that rock? That rock is Jesus Christ himself. We are being built into a temple as believers. And as we think about this great concept, the Bible speaking about our bodies being the temple of the Holy Spirit, it really challenges me as a physician and as a believer to care for my own health. Are you looking for some help on that journey? Do you have some health issues that you're concerned about? Or maybe you just want to have a clearer mind. Maybe you want to perform better physically. We have a special free program that's available for you on our website. We call it Performance Boost 30. It's a free 30-day program. If you sign up for it, absolutely free, every day you'll get an email with a link to a short video. They average about 6 minutes a day. I'll give you pointers on things you can add to your program each day for a month that can revolutionize your health. We call it Performance Boost 30. How do you access it? Simply go to timelesshealinginsights.org/boost. That's timelesshealinginsights.org/boost. When you go there, you'll have an opportunity to register, give us your email address, and automatically you'll receive every day for 30 days those practical health-giving lessons. With that in mind, let me pray for you today. Father in heaven, you've called us to follow you. You've offered us forgiveness and peace and a place in your church. You want to build us into a body of believers. You want us to care for our body temples. Help each of us on that journey, we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.